sort of half live with us today, and we will just collect your questions and make sure they reach the people that could maybe give us an answer if you have any. We're going to go on with the panel now. The panel is called Pay Transparency, Sharing International Perspective. And Emanuela Pozzan, I've really met you, I don't know how long ago it is. You're the senior gender specialist at the ILO in Geneva, and we met when during one of the Commission on the Status of Women in New York. I don't remember what year it was. It's quite some time ago. So it feels also like a long ongoing friendship on this journey to Planet Fair. And I really look forward to you now with your panel. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Enrique. And it was in 2017, I think. So a very good day to all of you, wherever you are joining us, to our guests and our participants. And it's a real pleasure to moderate this panel that will give us the opportunity to share an international perspective on what is happening on equal pay for work of equal value from a point of view, in particular, of legislation and interesting practices. So I have a very esteemed group of guests with me. So we have Harry Kyriazis, who's the chairman of the Social Affairs Committee of the Business Europe. We also have Esther Lynch, Deputy General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation. Katharina Miller, President of the European Women Lawyer Association, and Marie Konstance, who's a project lead for the Gender and Diversity Kpi Alliance with Catalyst. So we have 30 minutes to dive into this discussion, and I would like to encourage everyone to participate and share your views, experiences, reflections, examples, good practices also in the chat, so that we can have a broader conversation. And there are two burning questions that that the organizers have suggested to ask you all. And so the first one is, what measures in your views are effective to close the gender pay gaps? And which actions do you consider not as successful to close the gender pay gaps? In other words, in your experience or in your capacity, what works and what doesn't work or didn't work in addressing the gender pay gap? This could be, you know, as an individual in your company, or in a broader picture of your nation, your country, or globally. So feel free to engage on the chat. And in the meantime, we would like to start proposing a poll. So I would like to ask my colleague Leah to put up a poll where we would like to hear from you if you have ever shared information about your compensation with your co-workers. And so you have 4 answers. Yes, you have. No, but you would be willing to. And I don't see the questions anymore of the poll, but I'm pretty sure that you've all answered. Yeah, so the third option was no, and I would not be willing to, or you could also abstain. So do we have the answers, Leah? The results?
Yes, they should be here now. And not a lot of, we have 28 votes only, and in between it kind of knocked down. I don't know why, but I can reopen it later. But what
we can just get an indication.
Yeah, but we see that a majority has actually already talked about their own compensation with co-workers, which is a very good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move into the discussion. And my first question, oh, here are the results. So yes, 54% of people, no, but would we be willing to 36%, and no one would not be willing to 11%. So this is very interesting. And we do know that talking about pay is important to get to know, you know, the differences and the gap. So that's something that we can all start doing as well. So let's move into the conversation with our panelists. And I'd like to ask Harry Kyriazis, who's the chairman of the Social Affairs Committee Business Europe. And if I understood correctly, you have been involved in the discussions of in the consultations for the directive on pay transparency. And so this has been a quite intense discussion around pay transparency. And how has the discussion evolved within your association? You represent the employer side, but you're also an employer yourself, and you have an experience as an entrepreneur. So how do you drive the discussion around fair pay in your own business context? Harry, the floor is yours.
Yes, yes. Thank you. If I'm allowed to speak for the Greek context specifically,
Sure.
I would say that our country is a relative latecomer to the industrial era, let's say. We have been industrialized in the 50s and the 60s, so we don't have a long tradition. However, the large gender discrimination that existed at the beginning of this journey has largely diminished. We had laws against for equal pay a long time ago, against gender discrimination in pay. I believe that now this is not necessarily the highest problem. The problem lies in the other aspects that create pay discrimination. Stereotypes also have been diminished. As I was saying earlier to some of the participants, last year we finally elected a president of the Republic, which is our first woman president of the Republic. So symbolically, I can say that we have gone the full way. Also, as in other countries, the corporate governance laws have introduced a quota for women, and this has already created a change at the top of the business, let's say, management area. However, I still come from a generation which, when we were young, we saw stereotypes of women choosing specific careers, specific studies, and so on, that today show in lesser opportunities for development. There's segregation in labor markets. There has been segregation in education. Therefore, different career choices and stereotypes there. But I think the most important today is the lack of accessible childcare and other care infrastructures that push women into remaining at home, not pursuing careers, having difficulties in creating families. Whereas the other stereotypes have mostly been dismantled, the problem of childcare and care infrastructures is still there, and we are one of the countries with the lowest employment rate for women, which is connected with the pay gap when you see it statistically. It is not disintegrated into the causes of it, and also creates a low productivity for the entire economy, of course. The main priority here is to create these infrastructures that will give the opportunity for women to attain the employment. However, we had in Greece a crisis for 10 years, as you probably have heard, which when it was ending, then we had the pandemic. So we are in a perpetual, let's say, effort to do something about this with very little money still. However, the larger companies take some initiatives in this respect. But as everywhere else, the large companies represent a relatively small part of the total employment, so there are enormous proportion of women that potentially could access the labor market and don't have opportunities. So that is the focus in Greece. at the moment, it is not at the top priority of recent governments because of various crises. But I think that by example of the larger companies, there will be quite a push in this. This is something that goes in parallel with with the prescriptive nature of the pay transparency directive. So it is more in terms of policy initiatives and actions from the state or support for companies to substitute state infrastructures. So that's where we stand in Greece, more or less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry, and thank you for sharing the experience of Greece. And certainly interesting to hear that stereotypes are changing, and that the mindset, the overall mindset, is more in favor of women gaining momentum in the world of work. So that's very interesting indeed, and certainly the recovery initiatives that are happening around Europe could be an opportunity to center care. The need for care infrastructure, services, and policies in the recovery plans. So I would like to. So thank you very much for sharing your experience from your country. And I would like to now ask to Esther Lynch, who's the Deputy General Secretary from the ETUC, the European Trade Union Confederation. So going back to the transparency, pay transparency directive of the European Commission. I believe you have also been part of this discussion, and you have recently said that the European Union Pay Transparency Directive, as it stands, would shine a light on pay inequality, but provides few practical tools needed to end it. And so the question to you is very much, you know, from one side, the importance of this directive, from the other side, what tools do you wish for, and how would you have liked this directive to shape up and to be a little bit stronger for political action?
So, Emanuela, thanks so much for inviting the ETUC to be part of this discussion. And I'm joined with by my colleague, Aileen Busa, who's our gender equality expert. So I'm really happy she can be here too. And the reason for that is gender pay and equality between men and women is an unfinished revolution. And it's now, the baton's now passing from women, we say, of my generation to younger women. And I'm just so enthusiastic about watching what young women are going to achieve. And we heard from Kira in the Parliament on her vision of what the EU can do. Also, I want to say hello to Harry, because although Harry is, of course, representing Greece, he's also the lead negotiator for Business Europe at EU level, about to begin discussions with the ETUC on our work plan for the future. So for sure, stereotypes needs to be there, because stereotypes is not an issue of the past. We know it's not an issue of the past when we look to the newest sector, the tech sector, and coding, and we just see what's happening there. And I think that's what people are talking about when, you know, when they talk about not wanting to go back to the 1950s. I think what that is talking about is about in response to the COVID pandemic, it was expected that women would put their career on the back burner, and they would pick up all the slack in terms of the care, and either within their family or within their community. And I think one of the most stark examples of that is that professorial papers that during the COVID lockdown went up in terms of the production of professors' papers by men, and went down for women professors. So that's a very stark example of what people are beginning to talk about when they say that they're worried about things going backwards. In terms of this directive, we are so enthusiastic about this directive delivering finally the promise of the EU treaty that there would be equal pay between men and women. And it will do that if there's some key changes. And one of those is that when the worker gets the information, they have to be empowered to do something with it. And I know that Katharina Miller from the European Lawyers is going to be here, and lawyers have a very important role, and that role needs to be guaranteed in the directive, but not only the role of lawyers, because there's an awful lot that can be done in negotiations between workers, their unions and employers, so that gender equality becomes part of the collective bargaining rounds. And I really want to congratulate in particular the German government in their strong lead in identifying that, you know, the powerhouse of trade unions in Germany and in Italy being strong leaders in terms of identifying negotiated solutions, and that those negotiated solutions being effective not only in terms of challenging the undervaluing of work that's done predominantly by women, but also in putting in place an action plan in the company to overcome that, both in terms of increasing pay, but also in terms of recruitment strategies, in terms of promotion strategies, and in terms of anticipation of change and making sure that women have the chance in the company to benefit from the change, so that women are not, we say, losing out from change in the future, but instead will be winning from change in the future. And all of that, one small change, just guaranteeing that if the worker wants to be represented by their trade union, that will be guaranteed in terms of the negotiation in the company. Back to you, Emanuela.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think it's very interesting what you discussed now in terms of some aspects of the pay transparency directive, as well as, you know, the importance of social dialogue and collective bargaining, because we do see that there is a positive correlation between collective bargaining and the decrease in the narrowing of the gender pay gap and overall better gender equality in the context of the workplace. And so you actually connect very well. We can connect very well with Katharina Miller now, President of the European Women Lawyer Association, because Esther was talking about the role of lawyers and she was talking about the role of sanctions in case of non-compliance. And besides some big cases that we have seen in the UK, in the US, and in some other countries, in reality, you know, it's really hard to file a case on equal pay and to win it as well, and to go through it and win it. So, you know, your experience, I think, would be very, very important to share with us now in terms of your views on the directive, the European Commission directive, but also your personal experience. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Emanuela. And also, Esther, I'm so happy to be here with you. And Enrique, thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here with you. And Harry and Marie, of course, with you as well. And so, yeah, my personal, well, first of all, I'm wearing two hats, right? So the one as the president of the European Women Lawyers Association, and then as a professional, because I also happen to be a lawyer and a consultant of equal pay for big companies in Spain. But starting with the perspective of our NGO, European Women Lawyers Association, so there I can only say sanctions, sanctions, sanctions. And this is not me, but this is, I love him, an ombudsman, and former ombudsman from Sweden. So when I received a fantastic lecture by him some 20 years ago, he said, without sanctions, nothing works in social rights. And with sanctions, he was not referring to, I'm sorry, Esther, you were now speaking so good about Germany. As a German born, I might be able, and Henrique, please forgive me, I might be able to criticize Germany a little bit because I'm also Spanish. So the Spaniard now is criticizing Germany. Yeah, that Germany is, for example, we have seen this with the Women on Boards legislation in Germany, that the sanction in Germany was an empty seat. So if a company was obliged to nominate or to appoint a woman as a director, a director on a board, and if the company didn't comply, then the seat was empty. So there was no fine. And I think we as an NGO from the civil society have been realizing that these kind of sanctions don't work. What works are sanctions that are economic fines, because they normally hurt, and these fines have to be high, I'm so sorry for this, but normally only high economic sanctions work because...
Ti aspetti il turno, ci prendiamo un caffè.
Yeah. So this is our takeaway. And also I would like to remind all of us here that GDPR has been accepted very well by all of us, although there was a huge lobbying behind it, but there's a huge fines behind it. I mean, the Article 83, paragraph 4 of the GDPR sets forth fines of up to 10 million euros on the case of an undertaking, up to 2% of its entire global turnover of the preceding fiscal year. So I think, and then now I would like to connect with something that Esther has just said, that the proposal, the proposed directive is very positive because it also provides sanctions, fines, or of course it has to leave it up to the member states what they do with it, how they transpose this directive. And yeah, so this is in the draft, which I was told by Kira will be published at the beginning of September. And now coming back to another question, that sometimes it's very difficult for women to fight for their right. And exactly, so we really hope that with this directive, it will be easier to, for example, claim with class actions. I think we have to push forward class actions. So in solidarity, we should stick together and try to help our sisters and maybe also sometimes brothers, but maybe less the brothers, and support these women. And I just brought to you a recent case, again from Germany, of a fantastic journalist from ZDF. I can post it later in the chat. So ZDF is a very important German broadcast television. And the journalist is called Birte. And Birte, since 2017, has been trying to make her case because she felt that she was earning less than her male colleagues. And only 1 month ago, so after 4 years, the German Labor Court told her, gave her right, and now she has the result. And yeah, exactly, she was earning up to, I think, 800 euros less a month. So this is thousands of euros during a career. And this is really frustrating. Why? Because even though there is this good German law, this Entgeltgleichheitsgesetz, this transparency, equal pay law in Germany, we realize that it doesn't lead to the success, and it doesn't support the women that earn less. So there we hope that this directive will help us to get a step further. But I think I've spoken enough, and I will give now the floor back to you, Emanuela. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katharina, for sharing also your views on the law, the pay transparency law in Germany, even though it's still relatively new law. So, and you know, these laws need to be monitored, and we need to see the impact, which is the work that, for instance, Iceland is doing. I believe also Germany is looking into it. So that's very important. But next to it is also the importance of collective action that certainly can help the individuals. But turning now to Konstance, who's the project lead for the Gender Diversity Kpi Alliance for Catalyst. And I think she has some very interesting experiences to share with us in terms of, measuring the pay gap, but also what is triggering companies to participate in this alliance that you are part of. And so perhaps you can also tell us a little bit about this alliance.
Sure, absolutely. I welcome the opportunity to do so. Thanks. It's great to be part of a group of such like-minded people that, you know, are promoting equality for women. It's great to follow the passion of Katharina. The Gender and Diversity, excuse me, Kpi Alliance is a group that advocates for measurement. We advocate for measuring pay equality and representation in the talent pipeline. And our point is to say everyone should measure results, not efforts. There's a study in the US, I think from MIT, that says $8 billion is spent in the US for diversity. But, you know, if you don't know what the results are, what's the point? You really need to see that you're making change. So we're trying to normalize the thought that everyone should measure pay and representation. Some companies actually measure pay, but don't even want to say it. The reason people join the Kpi Alliance is that they look over and realize if they're spending this amount of money, time, energy to measure pay, they should show their leadership to the world. You know, they should inspire others. And it inspires their company, their employees, their shareholders, everyone. So even if your numbers aren't perfect now, but you're making progress and you're working hard on making progress, that's an important message to share with the world. So part of joining the Kpi Alliance is, you know, highlighting your leadership. But the other point is to share best practices. You know, there's a lot of subtlety in measuring. And what we do is create a community where everybody can exchange ideas, exchange best practices. So the Kpi Alliance, the Gender and Diversity Kpi Alliance, to give us our full name, has both very high level events, you know, so CEO roundtables, which will, you know, for example, we had GenPAC, Ancestry, Sedesco, talking about how they measure and how they actually hold people accountable in their organizations. And they take very different approaches. It's not all targets. It could be competitions. It could be just highlighting results, but they show how they make change. And then we have other companies come in and talk about things on a more detailed level. So we've had Bank of America and Boston Scientific talk about pay equity. How do you put that in practice? How does that work in an organization? And we also take it down even a further level. So we have an event coming up with Schneider Electric, who's going to talk about once you find a pay gap, how do you fix it? You know, and it's not easy, actually. It's not as clear as you might think if you haven't done this. And then finally, we're having an international event with Deloitte talking about how they measure diversity globally, because as you know, that's a challenge given laws and definitions. So we really try to make this accessible to companies. We don't have the legislation. I mean, we do have fair pay legislation, but we don't have the disclosure driving this, but we're trying to normalize the practice. And this group is run by both Catalyst, it was founded by Catalyst, but co-chaired by Catalyst and Ceramont, which is Working Mother Media. We're happy to say that Fair Pay Innovation Lab is also on our steering committee. And, you know, over almost 90 companies have joined in to voluntarily uphold these standards. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mary, because you touched upon something that I think is very interesting. In the absence of laws, you know, companies and any other actor can still do quite a lot. And I like this idea of normalizing the practice of pay transparency, even when there is no such a requirement from the government, for instance. So now I would like to ask you the two questions that we have asked to everyone, and in just one word, if you could respond, perhaps starting from Harry and then Esther, Katharina, and Mary, what in your experience or in your views, what works and what doesn't work in addressing the pay gap, the gender pay gap? Harry? One word, 2 words.
What works and what does not work? Well, it is very difficult for 2 words. I think we should have a clear understanding of the different causes, because there's not just one cause. The proposed directive concerns 1 or 2 of those causes, so it does not address everything. Of course, it should take into account various things that are being proposed by Business Europe, and that would greatly improve the directive and how it prescribes actions and sanctions. And it should take into account, for example, the different elements related to the job, such as tasks, skills, education of each person, so on. This is not very clear at the present draft. It should also take into consideration national context, including existing wage systems, and should accept also the collectively bargained pay structures. So there are some areas in which it can be improved in order to be better accepted and to be more efficient. Also to be more proportionate to what it wants to achieve. And at the same time, I'm saying again that we should keep in our minds that this is only part of the problem and that there is still work to be done, quite a bit, on all the other aspects that also contribute to the pay gap, to the gender pay gap.
Thank you, Harry. Esther?
Just with one word, however, I must say that Business Europe and its members at the national level and the companies that constitute those are strongly committed to gender equality. And that's why that we get into the discussion and try to improve the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Esther, from your side, what do you think works best and what doesn't really work in your experience or vis-a-vis the new directive, the draft directive?
So the status quo isn't working. So things have to change. The directive needs support from governments. It needs support from all sectors of society. For the directive to work, we need to make sure that the information gets into the hands of workers, and then workers are guaranteed that their union will be able to bargain for an action plan to close the gender pay gap that includes bargaining for work of equal value to end the undervaluing of work that's predominantly done by women. That's the elephant that we have to grapple with. That will work. What won't work is the current proposals in the directive that say the employer gets to choose who the representatives are for workers. That's a recipe for disaster. So that piece absolutely has to change. And I want to thank all the governments and all the NGOs and everybody who's recognized that for what it is, which is a bad idea. The other bad idea that won't work in the directive is to say this only applies to companies bigger than 250 because of 500, because that takes out 3/4 of the workforce. And the other piece that never works, and I hope that Katharina will help me a bit on this to put it more clearly, is when you have provisions in law which are really saying, yes, you can reveal your pay, but not unless it's this or not unless it's that, and you make it overly legally weird and complicated, and that just frightens people. So it has to be guaranteeing, making sure that workers know that they can discuss their pay. That will work.
Thank you very much, Esther. Very clear. And Katharina?
Yeah, sorry, I'm German, Emanuela. I just stick to this one word, 2 words. What didn't work, or what doesn't work, in my opinion, is voluntary agreements. Doesn't work. What works is regulation, and another word with sanctions, fines.
Thank you very much, Katharina. And Mary?
If I could summarize a huge topic in a sentence, I would say that measuring inputs is useless without really focusing on outputs. It's not your best efforts, it's your results.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think you have provided quite an overview of what is happening in some countries, but also in the broader context of the European Union in terms of this new draft directive that we hope will be approved by the end of this year. and that certainly will, will push forward the discourse on equal pay for work of equal value. So that's very, very important, and I thank you very much for all the different parts you come from and how you were able to show that that addressing the gender wage gap is requires a multidimensional approach, because the causes are many different causes and factors. We certainly need to measure better, to measure more. There is the aspects of social dialogue, collective bargaining, and also the discourse on voluntary versus compulsory measures. I don't know, I'm going to ask the organizers if we have time to do the poll, or if we should wrap up and leave the floor to the next session.
You should please just do the poll, and then we will move on into break. We are running behind, but we are fine. So just let everybody give their opinion. I think that's very important.
Yeah. So there is another poll. Here it is. What do you wish and expect from legislation to close the pay gap?